Welcome to our Wednesday edition of Beat Diabetes. Keep in mind that these Wednesday videos for the rest of this year are being created with you in mind, all the participants in our 2023 challenge. Now, you don't have to be in the challenge to benefit by them. After all, whether you beat diabetes by Christmas this year or perhaps watch this video 5 years later, beating diabetes is still beating diabetes. And the principles that work in 2023, well, they're going to work in 5 years, 10 years from now, even 100 years from now. The principles are not going to change. But if you are doing this challenge, these Wednesday videos are especially for you. And you cannot say that you're complying with the challenge guidelines if you do not watch all these Wednesday videos. Don't miss out on a single one of them. We constantly hear of testimonies of victory from time to time, and I like to share a few of them here and there just to encourage you. Here's a report I received by email. This individual, if I remember right, is a lady, says, I was first told in November of 2022 by my primary doctor that I was pre-diabetic, and I was very sad and scared. At that time, my A1c was 6.1. My mother was a type 1 diabetic at age 24, and she was dead by age 60. I decided I wasn't going to become a diabetic. I found your YouTube channel last November. At first, I didn't always understand what you would explain to us. Also, it was confusing because my dietitian kept telling me to eat more and more grains. The diabetic code and your book, 60 Ways to Lower Blood Sugar, helped me decide who to listen to. The truth as revealed by Mike and not the dietitian. Sometime before my mom's death from renal failure caused by diabetes, I promised her I would take care of myself so as not to become a diabetic. Because I was a slim-built person, I could eat lots of sugar when I was young, but not so today in my 61-year-old body. Last week, I cried tears of joy when my doctor told me I was no longer a pre-diabetic. My doctor said he would check out your YouTube channel and that he would purchase your book, 60 Ways to Lower Your Blood Glucose. I showed him my copy of your book and he liked it. My doctor said he wants your book as an educational resource to lend to diabetic patients. Glory to God. I'm convinced that one of the reasons why my Beat Diabetes YouTube channel has resulted in so very many diabetics becoming non-diabetics and reversing years and even decades of high glucose levels and surging destructive insulin levels is because of my constant, incessant hammering on the theme of the proper and continued use of the glucose meter or the continual glucose monitor. Sadly, this is an emphasis that is strangely absent from the advice and counsel of many doctors and diabetic nutritionists. They may give lip service to a glucose meter, they may even prescribe them, but many will refuse to push them very hard or even explain how to use them and why. When it comes to a dietary approach to beating, reversing, or managing diabetes, however you want to call it, theories abound. There are many respectable medical doctors who wear white coats, sound intelligent and articulate, and yet promote diets and lifestyles very nearly the opposite of one another. And if you've just been diagnosed as diabetic and you're searching desperately for answers, well, you can easily become confused and, even depressed over the fact that all the so-called experts are not saying the same thing. Why not? Should there not be one obvious answer to diabetes that is so powerful and so effective and so superior that every single doctor and every nutritionist will quickly get on board? How can there be such a difference of opinions? Well, I believe there is one diet and lifestyle that does fit that bill and is so effective and powerful that anyone and everyone who thoroughly investigates it should surely come to embrace it and shout it from the housetops. And that would be the case, except for the power of human bias and prejudice. We human beings, in case you hadn't noticed, are kind of stubborn and ornery. And once we think we know the truth, even if it is an outright lie and there's a mass of evidence against it, still we'll hold on to our views until the bitter end. And when I first discovered that I had serious blood sugar issues and was on the precipice of severe diabetes, I immediately started reading. And I found out, lo and behold, not everybody believed the same things about reversing diabetes. Of course, many didn't believe you could anyway. But even of those who believed you could, they believed different things. At first, I leaned to a vegetarian diet without worrying at all about carbohydrates. That's what I read in one particular man's writings. And my blood sugar fluctuations became far worse than ever. Finally, after some time that wasn't doing good at all on that path, I read some information and some books from Dr. Richard Bernstein and Dr. Robert Atkins. They both emphasize that meat is not our problem, but carbs and sugars surely are. Well, they made some sense, but I wasn't totally convinced. And this is where my blood sugar meter came to my rescue. Doctors Bernstein and Atkins both recommended a low-carb diet, the exact opposite of what I'd been doing. But what I'd been doing was clearly not working. My blood sugar was jumping all over the place. And numerous times I felt like I was ready to pass out, and one time I actually did pass out after church, and I came to with a nurse holding my head up who had called for the paramedics. I figured I had nothing to lose, but I wanted to be sure. And by now my secretary where I worked had given me a glucose meter and taught me how to use it. I don't know how it was that I began doing pre- and post-meal glucose tests. As far as I remember, I didn't read about this, nor was there any YouTubers around in those days. Somehow it just made sense to me that if I could avoid my blood sugar jumping up high after my meals, well, just maybe things would settle down and I could avoid those terrible hypos, very low glucose in other words, later on. It did not take me long to figure things out. Using a glucose meter that cost around $20, and a package of 50 strips that also cost about $20, and then buying several more packages as the months went on, I went to work. Within a few months, it became unquestionably clear to me that carbs and sugars raised my glucose to an unacceptably high level, and protein and fat had very little effect on my blood sugar. And when my glucose didn't rise very high after a meal, guess what? It never dropped very low 3 or 4 hours later, like had been the case. I was euphoric. I found I could control my blood sugar, and now I stopped having all those high blood sugar levels after meals, and I no longer had low blood sugar several hours later. My blood sugar stayed within a relatively narrow and healthy range. Wow! I felt like I'd figured out a great secret, one that almost nobody surely knew. Of course, a lot of people did know, but I didn't know that they knew. Within a few months of testing my blood sugar before and after meals, I was able to categorize foods as safe, iffy, or to be avoided at all costs. Salads, they were safe. Potatoes, they were landmines. Meat was safe. Anything with much sugar was a nightmare. Greens were safe and many low-carb vegetables, but bread and breakfast cereal, they were a disaster. Well, I've refined my diet since then. I've learned lots of new recipes and lots of low-carb foods. I've learned a lot more, but I had the fundamentals of a beat diabetes diet under my belt within about 6 months. That little glucometer that I use was not the most expensive meter on the market. In fact, it was one of the cheapest, and I'm sure it was probably far from the most accurate. But it was good enough. It revealed to me the basic way various foods and meals affected my blood sugar, and it was far better for me than most college courses or nutritionist lectures about diabetes and blood sugar. I had become a researcher and an expert on my own body, and I began to vet the foods and meals I ate, and to craft a diet that worked for me in keeping my glucose from spiking out of control. But my glucose meter and all those post-meal tests did something else for me besides just giving me information. Those hundreds of blood sugar tests I did created in me a firestorm of motivation. Once I knew there was a way of finding out exactly what foods were doing to me, I felt a powerful, almost irresistible passion to eat in such a way as to please my meter. In other words, to eat meals and foods that would result in me seeing a reasonable blood sugar score about an hour after I finished a meal. Jenny Rule calls this eating to the meter. Eventually, I decided that I did not ever want to eat any meal or food that would jack up my blood sugar past 140 milligrams per deciliter, which would be around 7.8 millimoles. And eventually, I lowered my target to 130, or my limit, I should say, except on very special occasions. Motivation was no longer a problem for me. Those numbers on that tiny glucose meter gave me all the motivation I needed. And the excitement I felt when I registered a good number an hour after a meal was positively exhilarating. To eat a large, low-carb meal and to be fully satisfied and yet get a glucose reading of, say, 115 or 118 milligrams per deciliter, maybe 6.6 millimoles, an hour after eating, made me want to just keep eating that way again and again for the rest of my life. As a result, my A1Cs improved, my fasting glucose improved, and these were reflected in the numbers I was seeing in my glucose meter. And the more I improved, the more I wanted to continue to improve. And what I discovered is that my tiny little friendly neighborhood glucose meter was like a bottle of supercharged information and motivation. This turned out to be the tool God used to answer my prayers and lead me out of diabetes into glucose control and normal blood sugar. And of course, through my books and through my YouTube videos, I've been preaching Mike the Meter ever since. You might say I am Mike's biggest fan. Let's talk about the use of your glucose meter while doing this challenge. You might suppose there would be no real need to test your glucose while you're on the challenge, since you're eating low-carb meals anyway. It is unlikely that any of these meals will send your glucose into the stratosphere, since they're all low-carb meals. And this is the truth, but still there's an important reason to check your glucose, and that is to be able to identify the progress that you're making. There is a saying, nothing succeeds like success, and that is so true. Many of you have lived with sky-high blood sugar levels for years. Some of you, well, you've just found out you have not just got diabetes, you've got raging diabetes. And you're willing to try almost anything to see if you can get some help. But often people come into this low-carb diet with time-restricted eating grudgingly. First, you may not be sure it will work, and second, it's in your mind a very big pain to change your eating habits so radically. And if that's your attitude, it probably would not take much for you to throw the whole thing out and just go back to the comfort food and comfort lifestyle that you had before. You're putting your toes into the water, but you're not at all sure whether that water may be cold or too cold for your liking. What you need, and you need it very badly, is a taste of success. You need to see with your eyes that what you're doing is actually going to work, and to work very, very well. You're not about to take some YouTuber's word for it, and I don't blame you. And many of you don't even want to take a doctor's word because they're all over the map with what they say and believe. You need to see something for yourself and to know that this approach can make a real difference in your life. And that is why I'm encouraging you to test yourself frequently. Post-meal blood sugar tests will affirm that these meals you're eating are not spiking your glucose. Even if your blood sugar is at a level of 300 milligrams per deciliter, which is terribly high, if it only rises 30 points to 330 after your meal, well, you can be proud of yourself. You're on the right track. You may have a long way to go for sure, but at least you've started moving in the right direction. Taking your fasting glucose levels in the morning when you first wake up will be valuable. You don't need to do it every day, but you should do it several times a week. This can demonstrate the direction of your progress. Even if your numbers are lousy, at least they're improving. Let's say a 185 milligrams per deciliter in the morning. Well, that's a pretty poor blood sugar to have when you first wake up. But if 2 weeks ago, previously, you had a 220, When you woke up, well, you have something to celebrate. You're making progress. Even if you're only taking baby steps are infinitely superior to no steps at all. And at some point, if you follow the challenge guidelines, it's quite possible those baby steps will turn into giant leaps. Have faith and keep moving forward. I would like for you to take a home A1c test with your glucose meter at least 4 times during this challenge. First, take one at the beginning of the challenge, then after 1 month on the challenge, then after 2 months, then after 3, and finally at the end of the challenge, after 4 months, the week after Christmas. If you'll be faithful to follow the guidelines, I believe you should see improvement with each A1c you take. Now, you may be saying, well, how do you take a home A1c with a glucose meter? You need to determine your estimated average glucose over a single day. Now, that number should reflect neither your highest levels nor your lowest ones. An average glucose should involve taking the highs, the lows, and the in-betweens and getting, well, an average. Here's a way to do that. Test your glucose 5 times with a glucose meter in a single day. Here are 5 times that I recommend. Test 1 when you first get up in the morning. Test 2, 1 hour after lunch. Test 3, 3 hours after lunch. Test 4, 1 hour after dinner. Test 5, just before going to bed. Get your blood sugar scores for these 5 tests, add the numbers together, and then divide by 5, and that should give you a pretty good estimated average glucose for that day. Then take that EAG, which stands for Estimated Average Glucose, and either calculate the results or plug that number into an online calculator. To calculate your A1c yourself, take your estimated glucose average number for the day, that's the total divided by 5, and then add 46.7. Now divide by 28.7. This will give you your A1c score. This only works with the milligrams per deciliter number. You may need to convert it. Now, if you went to a lab the next day, your A1c would probably be quite different because the one you calculated was based on a single day, yesterday. But a lab A1c would be based on your average glucose over the last 3 to 4 months. So the A1c you just calculated should be the A1c if you go to a lab about 3 or 4 months later. The ADA has an online calculator. You click on the EAG as your source. You click on the milligrams per deciliter under the words to, TO. Now enter your estimated daily glucose score and then click on the Calculate box. Look at the results box just under the Calculate button and you will see your A1c expressed as a percentage. Recently, I did this test myself just to demonstrate how it works. Plus, I was a little bit curious what number I would get. It's been a while since I've been to a lab and had a lab A1c. So on a Saturday, I did these 5 tests. Saturday is the day of the week I eat a regular breakfast, not simply drink a mug of bulletproof coffee as most other days. So on this day, upon waking, my blood sugar read 88. I had a breakfast of ham and eggs, and then for lunch I had spaghetti and cheese, but instead of traditional pasta noodles, I ate my spaghetti sauce over a bed of spaghetti squash. An hour after this meal, my glucose read 98. 3 hours after the meal, my blood sugar was at 92. For dinner, I had pizza. You heard it right, pizza, but the crust was a special crust I made in the microwave consisting of almond flour, whey protein isolate, whole psyllium husks, and a couple of teaspoons of heavy cream. So very few carbs in the crust. This meal must have pleased Mike the meter because an hour after eating the pizza, I had a blood sugar of 91. And then I had ice cream as a dessert, but once again, this was a low-carb version using heavy whipping cream and allulose for sweetener, plus a little vanilla extract. I added some sugar-free coconut flakes, sugar-free chocolate, and had some ground peanuts to put on top of it all. And it made an incredible dessert to eat while Benedict and I watched a classic old movie. My final test for the day was a 93 just before going to bed. To get my A1c based on this day's readings, I added those 5 numbers together and got a total of 462. Then I divided 462 by 5. This would be my estimated average glucose. which was 92.4. Then I added 46.7, which gave me 139.1. Finally, I divided this number by 28.7, and that gave me an A1c of 4.846. Then I tried using the online calculator. I plugged in my 92.4 average, and it told me that my A1c based on this number would be 4.8. So either way works. My last lab A1c was 5.0, so this was not far from that, and this is a pretty good way to see where you are right now in terms of your projected A1c, the number you should get by going to the lab 3 months from now if you continue to eat the way you're eating and get similar glucose scores. So, my friends, to sum up, use that glucose meter or CGM and use it wisely. Start vetting your meals, especially once you come off this challenge, and begin encouraging yourself as you see those incredible, powerful, nearly irresistible twin brothers that we call information and motivation. I want you to know that I have another YouTube channel. It's called by my name, Dennis Pollock, and on this channel, my wife Benedicta and I teach the basics of the Bible in a simple, user-friendly fashion. Normally, on Mondays, I post what I call a video devo, in which I take various Bible topics and share scriptures to help you understand the subject a little better. On Thursdays, I post Bible studies by Benedicta and me as we sit at our dining room table and discuss various portions of the Scriptures. We cover book studies and Bible character studies. So catch me on Mondays sharing devotional talks, and Benedicta and me on Thursdays as we study the greatest book in the world, the Bible. Check in the description to find a link to our Bible teaching channel, which is called by my name, Dennis Pollock.